The thing that really appeals to me about the thinking environment, I think about it as a quiet revolution. It's not a boot stompy revolution. It's something which can radically change the way we engage in life. And because of these four things, it's values affirming, power sharing, culture changing, and diversity enhancing. And no wonder it's resisted, because actually, if we can nail all of that, then the world would be a really different place. And I think Bryony described it as a way of being in the world or a way of life. It's something that can operate in learning spaces. As a teacher educator myself, I operated each class in a thinking environment, in organisations and workplaces, though it will meet resistance, in virtual spaces, and this is the first time anybody's ever done this, I think, actually held thinking environments online in this way. I've certainly not heard of it before. In families and relationships, and my son, he's 21, he's been raised in a thinking environment, and that absolutely plays out in the man that he is. And very much so in political environments. And Kay and I and our colleague Leslie have done some work with locally elected members, which has really led to some very small but powerful places of change, and I'd love to do more political work with it. To come back to those four areas where I think it has impact, in what the thinking environment leads to is the establishment of a dialogue around values. So for me, that then leads to intentional ethical practice. It leads inevitably to reflexivity. Articulating values is something that we don't do enough of. And being able to connect those values to practice principles happens within the languages of a thinking environment. It's power sharing because you can't engage in it without humility. Equality is absolutely, it's locked into it. It's difficult to sabotage, impossible to sabotage, impossible to avoid responsibility as well. So not only can you not be that dominant person, you also can't be that person who subverts by refusing to get involved. It's culture changing in its quiet insistence. So the repeated practice of it creates a culture of listening, respect, attention, and ease. And it's diversity enhancing in the fact that each individual is present as themselves. So you always start off with everyone being present. And the perspectives from absent, invisible, oppressed identities can be heard within the room. They can be brought into the room through the individual identities of people who are present and equal. I've been doing a lot of work on mental health and well-being recently in education. There's a crisis, absolute crisis of it. And so I've left this slide in as well, that the thinking environment is impossible to bleed into therapy if the rules are followed. It's very boundaried, it's very predictable. The thinking you do, as Jo said, might not be predictable. You might go to all sorts of places, but the process, you know what's coming next, and that feels very safe. There's the relief of being present as yourself, not having to hide any aspects of your diversity, that you are welcome, you are welcomed into the room in all your identities. And it's easeful and never hurried. It's a mindful, repetitive practice. And for me, the thing, you know, thinking about organizations and meetings, the stress of trying to be heard is lifted. That stress of being in a meeting like, you know, when a meeting's run in a thinking environment, you know you're going to get your turn. There's an absolute joy of being listened to with that generative attention. It's based on the work of Nancy Kline. She was raised a Quaker, so its roots are very much in that contemplative, quiet silence of Quakerism. And her books are worth reading. Go straight to the second book, More Time to Think, which is much more practical. I've written some stuff about it on my blog, and there's a Time to Think website as well. And Nancy is a lady from New Mexico, and I use that word advisedly. She's very sort of, you know, Marks and Spencer in her dress and very sort of genteel. And she stood in front of 80 people 10 years ago at Northern College and said, interruption is an act of violence. And there was this collective, because obviously lots of things are violent, and interruption, you know, is a really tiny thing in all of that. But if you are thinking, and you are on a path and your thinking is flowing and somebody comes in with, oh yeah, that happened to me, that's it, you're derailed. And so I absolutely get that. And it's a really powerful statement and incredibly true. So what is it? The thinking environment comprises 10 components, 10 values that have to be in place. And when all 10 are in place, then we're in a thinking environment. If one is missing, we're not. We might still be having a fabulous quality experience, but we're not fully in a thinking environment. And so in life, it's not about being in a thinking environment all the time, but it's about knowing when you are and knowing when you're not and making positive choices about that. And then there are many applications. And interestingly, Nancy used the word application long before we had apps on phones. These are ways of applying those 10 components, either with one other person or with more. And these are the 10 components, they're those big words, all of these things in place. So at the moment, the attention you are giving me is helping me do my best thinking, be able to speak in flow. We have an equality, which me doing a presentation sort of breaks a little bit, but won't for the rest of the session when everybody's equal in the round. We will take time to offer each other a word of appreciation. There's hopefully an ease to this hour. Nobody's feeling stressed or rushed. And we're going to be giving one another encouragement to be able to participate. The place is important, and whether we can hold that sense of place here online in Zoom is something that I'm really interested in finding out. Feelings are okay in a thinking environment. We don't infantilize, we don't patronize, we don't stop people expressing what they need to express, even to give them a tissue, I'm afraid. And information is vital, because thinking can't happen if a vital piece of information is missing. Unfortunately, in life, we often confuse information with opinion. I've spoken about diversity and the importance of diversity of opinion and diversity of identity. And then the thinking environment contains, and I hope we do get onto this in the months to come, it actually contains a really structured, really detailed and precise questioning framework, which is the coaching element of it. And we can't do that in half an hour, but we can do that if we continue to practice together. And I hope that we will get to that point. So attention in a thinking environment is generative. It's about generating, igniting the best thinking. If interruption is an act of violence, it's time to start questioning ourselves. Are we listening to respond, or are we listening to even interrupt? That thing where somebody's speaking and you're forming your response to it in your head is cultural. This listening to generate the best thinking is countercultural, really. The whole thing is based on a positive philosophical choice. So it's based on one single assumption, and that's that human beings are inherently good. You just can't go about it if you're going to be cynical and suspicious. You just can't. So I'm leaving that there. In terms of the applications, there are applications that we call the building blocks of the thinking environment. All we're going to have time for today is we've done a thinking round, and we'll do another 2 rounds, and I'm hoping a thinking pair, because there's the possibility to use breakout rooms in this Zoom. I've never done that before, but I want us to give it a go and see if we can spend some time thinking in pairs. There are many further applications, and the Time to Think Council is one that stands out that we could easily do in a Zoom. There's a transforming meetings process, there's coaching, there's mentoring, and hopefully we can practice all of these if we stay together as a practice group. Come on to think in pairs when I finish this presentation. I've already said that no one's truly arrived until they've spoken, and we probably won't go to 5 minutes each, but I do want you to get practicing what it feels like to be given a wonderful listening opportunity where silences are allowed to lengthen, and that's countercultural, isn't it? And there's absolutely no interruption allowed ever. So we'll do that when I've stopped with this presentation. Just briefly to say something about the Transforming Meetings application. Again, you could take away now the idea of agenda items as questions. The brain opens up in the presence of a question. It closes down in the presence of an agenda item that says next year's budget, yeah? But if you frame that as a question, as something positive, like the positive opening round question, you actually might get somewhere. No, any other business, that's an absolute power play, somebody coming in at the end to throw a bomb. Meetings made up of thinking pairs, of rounds where you ask what people's freshest thinking is, and the council is something we'll look at on another occasion. So in terms of this practice group, principles of it, whoever's there's the right people. I had these ideas to start, facilitate this first session, but I really hope it can develop organically. The word I like to use in my practice is rhizomatically, spreading its way out, you know, underground, overground, wherever it needs to go. We'll start off with rounds and pairs and the council as being applications that Zoom seems to be able to provide a good space for. And I'm suggesting that I open the space monthly. I'll put that pre-work in to bring in new people who might be interested. And I'm hoping that as soon as anyone is confident, we can actually share the facilitation.